Australia has trucks so long they look more like trains than vehicles, yet you barely see anything like them anywhere else. The obvious explanation is that Australia is huge and empty. But Canada is huge. Russia is huge. America moves far more freight. So why did Australia become the one place where these monsters actually became normal? The answer hides in a strange mix of engineering, broken infrastructure, government policy, and a transport problem most countries solved differently. Subscribe if you enjoy uncovering the hidden reasons behind everyday machines. Because the real story of the road train has surprisingly little to do with empty roads. Australia didn't invent road trains. It built a system for them. The obvious explanation sounds almost too perfect. Australia is huge. The Outback is empty. So naturally, someone built an enormous truck and attached more trailers to it. But there is a problem with that story. Australia is not the only enormous country. Canada has vast stretches of remote highway. The United States moves staggering amounts of freight. Both countries also allow certain long combination vehicles, including doubles and triples, on selected routes. So the real difference is not that Australia invented the idea of pulling multiple trailers. It did something much harder. It created a legal and physical environment where extremely long combinations could operate as a normal part of the freight system. In parts of Australia, approved road train configurations can reach roughly 53.5 meters from front to back. That is not just a large semi. It is an entirely different category of vehicle. And that changes the question. Why did road trains become deeply embedded in Australia while remaining far more restricted elsewhere? Because once a country builds regulations, designated routes, rest areas, loading facilities, bridge standards, and access rules around a vehicle, that vehicle stops being an experiment. It becomes infrastructure. Australia did not simply build a bigger truck, it built a place where that truck could survive. One bush mechanic made a 50-meter truck turn corners. Making a road train long is easy. Making it turn is not. Imagine a prime mover towing several trailers through an Outback River crossing or around a tight bend. Every trailer, naturally, wants to take a slightly shorter path than the vehicle ahead of it. With enough trailers, that effect compounds. The last trailer can drift far inside the path of the truck at the front. On narrow tracks that can put wheels into soft ground, trees, embankments, or worse. That was the engineering problem facing early road train operators. And one of the people who helped make the concept commercially practical was Central Australian bush mechanic Kurt Johansen. After World War II, Johansen obtained a surplus American Diamond T-tank transporter and developed a road train that became known as Bertha. But his most important contribution was not simply adding more trailers. He adapted the self-tracking principle used on an earlier government road train and developed a simpler system suited to harsh commercial work. The goal was clever: make each trailer follow much closer to the path of the one in front. That matters enormously when your vehicle is longer than many buildings. Johansen did not create the road train in one magical moment, and he did not invent every part of the system from scratch. What he did was arguably more important. He took an experimental concept and made it useful in the real Outback. His equipment had to survive heat, dust, rough tracks, enormous distances, and very limited access to workshops. Johansen's road train was eventually credited with traveling roughly 2 million miles. So the Australian road train was not born from one grand industrial laboratory. Part of it was perfected by a mechanic in one of the most isolated places on Earth. Australia's railways left a freight vacuum. If distance alone created road trains, Canada and Russia should be full of them. They are not. To understand why Australia became so dependent on giant trucks, you have to look at something that seems completely unrelated: railway gauges. During the 19th century, Australia's colonies developed their railway systems separately. New South Wales adopted standard gauge. Victoria used broad gauge. Queensland and several other networks relied heavily on narrow gauge. The result was a fragmented system in which trains from one network could not always continue directly onto another. At certain break-of-gauge points, passengers changed trains. Freight could have to be unloaded and transferred. During wartime, that became more than an inconvenience. It exposed just how awkward a disconnected national rail system could be. Australia eventually standardized many important interstate routes, and rail remains essential to the country's freight economy today. But development was uneven, particularly across the remote north and interior. The standard gauge connection between Alice Springs and Darwin, for example, was not completed until 2004. That left an enormous logistical gap. Mining sites, cattle stations, settlements, and supply depots were scattered across territory too remote to justify railway lines everywhere. Roads, however, could reach far more places and could be extended or upgraded gradually as demand grew. This created exactly the environment in which road trains became valuable. They offered some of the carrying capacity associated with rail, but without needing steel tracks running all the way to every cattle station or mine. And it raises an interesting possibility. If Northern Australia had developed a dense, unified railway network a century earlier, would the road train ever have become such an iconic machine? Maybe not. The government built roads for cattle, not cars. In most countries, trucks are designed around the roads that already exist. Lane widths, intersections, bridges, turning radiuses, and traffic density all place limits on how large a vehicle can realistically become. Parts of Australia developed in almost the opposite direction. Across northern Australia, the challenge was not simply moving people between cities. It was moving cattle and supplies across enormous distances between remote properties, railheads, processing areas, and ports. That made freight access a national economic problem. Programs such as Queensland's Beef Roads scheme invested heavily in improving routes through cattle country. By 1974, more than 39 to 80 kilometers of these roads had been completed, helping road trains move livestock out of areas that had previously been extremely difficult to serve efficiently. Think about what that means. These were not just ordinary highways where road trains happened to appear later. In some regions, the freight task itself helped shape the development of the road network. That is the trick. Long, heavy combinations become much easier to operate when roads are built or upgraded with heavy freight in mind. Stronger bridges matter. Suitable intersections matter. Passing opportunities matter. Pavement strength matters. So do places where enormous combinations can stop, turn, refuel, and separate trailers. The same logic still appears in modern infrastructure programs across northern Australia, where road upgrades can be designed specifically to improve access for high-productivity freight vehicles, including road trains. So when you see a triple road train rolling across the Outback, you're not just looking at a truck adapted to an unusual environment. You're looking at an environment that, in part, was adapted to the truck. The real secret is where road trains are allowed to go. There is one final misconception that makes Australian road trains seem even stranger than they really are. The idea that they can simply drive anywhere because the country has lots of empty space. They cannot. Road trains operate on approved networks. Different vehicle configurations are allowed on different routes, and access can depend on factors such as vehicle length, mass, turning performance, bridge capacity, road geometry, and how closely the trailers track behind the prime mover. If an operator needs to leave the authorized network, additional approval or a permit may be required. That is why saying road trains are completely banned from Australian cities is too simple. Some urban and regional areas have designated road train routes. The Northern Territory, for example, publishes routes around places including Darwin, Catherine, Tennant Creek, and Alice Springs. But the larger point remains. A 50-meter road train cannot behave like an ordinary truck. A country wanting to copy Australia's system would need much more than powerful engines and extra trailers. It would need suitable bridges, intersections, level crossings, parking areas, fuel stops, freight terminals, road surfaces, enforcement rules, and carefully mapped access networks. And that is the hidden reason these machines are so difficult to export. Australia spent decades building an ecosystem around them. Once that ecosystem exists, a gigantic multi-trailer truck makes economic and practical sense. Without it, the same vehicle becomes a regulatory and infrastructure nightmare. The secret of the Australian road train, then, is not really the truck. It is everything around it. Road trains look like an extreme solution to an extreme landscape. But their real story is about something bigger, a country slowly shaping its roads, rules, and freight network around one unusual machine. That is why Australia could make them practical when most places could not. Click the next video to uncover another hidden trucking mystery. Like, subscribe, and tell us what surprised you most in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.